You can't sit inside. We are fully booked. You can sit outside and enjoy your dinner.
Outside in this weather?
Oh, I'm sorry. You just have to manage. Or you take your leave.
Welcome, sir and ma'am. We have a special seat available for you.
On a quiet winter evening in Seoul, a restaurant hostess looked at a Nigerian woman and decided she did not belong inside. She smiled politely, but her words were cold. The patio is available. The patio. In the middle of winter. What the hostess didn't realize was that the man standing beside that woman was Min Jun. A man who rarely raised his voice. But a man whose silence could close businesses. Within 27 minutes, that restaurant would begin to disappear. Not with shouting. Not with threats. But with strategy. And by the end of the night, the woman they disrespected would become the new owner. Seoul in winter had a special kind of silence. Cold air moved slowly through the city streets, and the lights from restaurants and shops reflected softly on the snow-dusted sidewalks. It was the kind of evening where people preferred to sit indoors, surrounded by warm lights, good food, and quiet conversation. Ella liked evenings like that. She had lived in Seoul for 3 years, but she never stopped noticing how different it felt from home in Nigeria. The city was fast, organized, quiet in a way that was sometimes intimidating. But tonight was supposed to be simple. Just dinner. Nothing more. Ella stood in front of the mirror in their apartment, adjusting the sleeve of her black dress. It was elegant but simple, exactly the way she liked it. Min Jun stood near the window behind her. He was reading something on his phone. As always, Min Jun was a man who rarely wasted time. But when he noticed Ella looking at him through the mirror, he placed the phone in his pocket. "Ready?" he asked calmly. Ella smiled slightly. "Yes." Min Jun walked toward the door and opened it for her. That was one of the things Ella liked about him. He was powerful, feared by many, but he still believed in small gestures, respectful ones. The drive across the city was quiet. Seoul's night skyline glowed beautifully through the car windows. Luxury stores, office towers, busy streets full of people moving quickly through the cold. Their destination was a restaurant Ella had wanted to try for months. It was famous, elegant, the kind of place people booked weeks in advance. When the car stopped in front of the building, Ella looked up at the glowing sign above the entrance. "Finally," she said softly. Min Jun glanced at her. "You've been waiting for this place." Ella nodded. "Everyone says the food is incredible." Min Jun smiled faintly. "Then we should test that theory." They stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance. Warm light spilled through the glass doors. Inside, the restaurant looked exactly as beautiful as Ella imagined. Soft music. Golden lighting. People sitting comfortably at tables, enjoying their meals. For a moment, Ella felt excited. Like this would be one of those quiet evenings she would remember later. But sometimes the smallest moments change everything. And this was one of those moments. The hostess noticed them immediately. Her smile appeared quickly, professional and practiced. But it changed slightly when she looked at Ella. Not enough for most people to notice. But enough for Min Jun to see it. "Good evening," the hostess said. "Reservation name?" Min Jun answered calmly. Min Jun. The hostess turned toward the computer. Her fingers moved across the screen as she searched for the reservation. A moment later, she nodded. "Yes. I see it." Then she looked at Ella again. Her expression tightened just slightly. It was subtle. But it was there. Ella had experienced that look before. A quiet moment where someone decided something about you, without knowing anything about you. The hostess picked up 2 menus. Then she said something strange. "Unfortunately, the indoor dining room is full tonight." Ella blinked in surprise. She glanced around the restaurant. Several tables were empty. Then the hostess pointed toward a set of glass doors. The patio is available. Ella looked outside. The patio tables were completely empty. But it was winter. Cold air pressed against the glass. The outdoor heaters were not even turned on. Ella spoke gently. Are you sure there are no indoor tables? The hostess nodded immediately. Yes. I'm sorry. Her voice was polite, but firm. Min Jun remained silent. He simply watched. Then something happened that made the situation very clear. Another couple entered the restaurant behind them. The hostess greeted them warmly. Her tone changed instantly. Welcome. She checked their reservation. Then she smiled brightly. Right this way. And she walked them directly into the indoor dining area. To a table. Inside. Ella said nothing. But the message was obvious. Min Jun turned toward her. His voice was calm. Would you like to sit outside? Ella shook her head slowly. No. Then she added quietly, I'd rather go somewhere else. Min Jun nodded once. All right. They walked out without another word. The hostess watched them leave. For some reason, she suddenly felt uneasy. But she didn't know why. Once they were back inside the car, the driver closed the door and began driving away from the restaurant. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The city lights passed slowly outside the window. Ella stared at them quietly. She wasn't angry. But she felt something heavier. Disappointed. Moments like that had happened to her before. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just small, quiet decisions that reminded her she didn't always belong in certain places. Min Jun finally spoke. Did that happen often? Ella looked at him. She hesitated before answering. Sometimes. Min Jun leaned back in his seat. His expression did not change. But something in his mind had already begun to move. He took out his phone. Then he made a call. The phone rang once before someone answered. Director Kim. The voice on the other end immediately responded. Yes, sir. Min Jun looked out the window. He could still see the restaurant sign glowing behind them in the distance. Then he spoke calmly. I need a full financial review of the hospitality group that owns that restaurant. Director Kim paused. Yes, sir. Begin immediately. Min Jun ended the call. Ella watched him. You're angry, she said softly. Min Jun shook his head slightly. No. Then he looked at her. But disrespect should never become habit. Director Kim was one of the most efficient men in Seoul. When Min Jun gave instructions, things moved quickly. Within 15 minutes, his team had already identified the restaurant's ownership. It was part of a mid-sized hospitality group. The group owned 6 restaurants across the city. But the financial structure behind the company was complicated. Several investors supported the business. One of those investment groups had strong connections to Min Jun's financial network. Director Kim studied the numbers carefully. Then he made a phone call. Then another. And another. Nothing aggressive. Nothing illegal. Just business. By the time the restaurant finished serving its last customers that night, its financial support had quietly begun to disappear. The next morning began normally for the restaurant staff. The manager arrived early. The chefs prepared ingredients. The hostess arranged menus. Everything seemed normal. Until 2 government vehicles stopped in front of the building. 3 inspectors walked inside. The manager approached them immediately. Good morning. Can I help you? One inspector showed a document. We're here for a structural inspection. The manager frowned. A structural inspection? Yes. But we passed our inspection last year. The inspector nodded politely. This is a new review. The manager sighed. How long will this take? The inspector looked around the building carefully. Possibly several days. The restaurant had no choice. The doors were closed. Customers were turned away. And within hours, an announcement appeared online. Temporary closure for structural review. Most people thought it was a normal inspection. But behind the scenes, the restaurant had already begun to fall apart. And the real consequences had only just begun. The restaurant doors had never been closed for more than a day before. But now the chairs were stacked. The lights were dim. And a small printed notice hung on the glass entrance. Closed for structural inspection. The manager stood inside the empty dining room staring at it. Nothing made sense. The building had passed inspection the previous year. There were no complaints. No construction issues. No warning. Yet suddenly 3 inspectors had arrived and closed the entire restaurant. He pulled out his phone and called the company headquarters. After several rings, someone answered. Corporate office. This is Manager Park, he said quickly. What is going on? Why are inspectors here? There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman replied cautiously. We are currently reviewing the situation. Reviewing what situation? Park demanded. No one informed us about this. Another pause. Then the answer came quietly. There are financial developments. Park frowned. Financial developments. Yes. We will contact you again soon. The call ended. Park stared at the phone. Something was very wrong. But he had no idea how wrong it actually was. Because while the restaurant sat closed and silent, something much larger was unfolding across the city. Inside a tall glass office tower across Seoul, Director Kim sat calmly in a conference room. Several financial advisors sat across the table from him. Documents covered the table. Screens displayed financial charts. One advisor spoke carefully. The hospitality group depends heavily on one credit line. Director Kim nodded. And that credit line? It is connected to investors inside our network. Director Kim leaned back slightly. Good. Another advisor added something interesting. If that credit line disappears, the company will struggle to operate within 48 hours. Director Kim looked at the numbers one last time. Then he made a decision. Proceed. No threats. No intimidation. Just business. One investor withdrew funding. Then another. Then another. The hospitality group suddenly found itself in a financial storm it did not understand. Phones rang. Meetings were scheduled. Emergency discussions began. But the damage had already started. And the most dangerous part of the situation was this. The company had no idea who was behind it. 2 days later, Manager Park finally received a message. A short one. Corporate meeting required. He arrived at the office building early the next morning. The receptionist greeted him politely. Director Kim will see you now. Park followed her down a quiet hallway. He entered a large office. A man in a dark suit stood beside the window. Director Kim. He turned slowly. Manager Park, he said calmly. Park bowed slightly. Director. Please sit. Park sat nervously. He still did not understand what was happening. Then Director Kim placed a document on the table. The company that owns your restaurant has new ownership. Park blinked. New ownership. Yes. Park leaned forward. Who bought it? Director Kim answered calmly. Min Jun. For several seconds, the room was silent. Everyone in Seoul's business world knew that name. Park felt the blood drain from his face. Min Jun. Director Kim nodded. Yes. Then he added something else. Do you remember a woman you asked to sit on the patio? Park froze. In that moment, everything suddenly made sense. Park struggled to speak. That was just a misunderstanding. Director Kim remained calm. Was it? Park quickly tried to defend himself. We were busy that night. The interior tables were full. Director Kim opened another document. Inside were photographs from the restaurant that evening. Empty tables. Available seating. Park felt his stomach tighten. Director Kim looked at him quietly. Our organization believes something very simple. Respect must be consistent. He closed the folder slowly. And humiliation without consequence becomes policy. Park lowered his head. Then Director Kim spoke the final words of the meeting. Your employment has been terminated. No shouting. No anger. Just finality. Park left the building in silence. His career in Seoul's restaurant industry had ended in one quiet meeting. But Min Jun had given another instruction as well. One that surprised even Director Kim. Not every employee in the restaurant was responsible for the situation. The chefs had worked hard. The servers had treated customers well. They were simply part of a system led by the wrong people. Min Jun's instruction was clear. Transfer them. Within days, the staff received new job offers. Better restaurants. Better salaries. Better management. Some employees were shocked. Others were grateful. One waitress said something quietly during her final shift. I don't understand why this is happening, but I'm glad it did. Meanwhile, the restaurant itself remained closed. Construction workers entered the building. Designers arrived. Furniture was replaced. Walls were redesigned. A new sign was quietly prepared. But the biggest change had not been announced yet. Because the person who would soon control everything still had no idea. Ella. For nearly 2 weeks, the restaurant remained closed. To the public, the explanation was simple. Renovation. But inside the building, everything was changing. The old furniture disappeared. New lighting was installed. The dark interior was redesigned to feel warmer and more welcoming. The menu was rebuilt from the ground up. But the biggest change was invisible. Ownership. The hospitality group that once controlled the restaurant no longer existed. Its debts had been quietly absorbed. Its investors had disappeared. And the entire property now belonged to Min Jun's network. Director Kim walked through the restaurant one afternoon with a team of designers. He studied the layout carefully. This place was always profitable, one designer said. Director Kim nodded. The problem was never the business. The problem was leadership. By the end of the renovation, the restaurant looked completely different. Elegant. Balanced. Professional. But no one outside the company knew who the new executive director would be. Not yet. Because Min Jun had something else in mind. A few days later, Ella sat quietly in their apartment reading a book. The city lights glowed softly outside the window. It had been a normal week. Nothing unusual had happened. She had almost forgotten about the restaurant. Min Jun entered the room carrying a thin folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. Ella looked up. What's this? Min Jun sat down across from her. Open it. Ella picked up the folder. Inside was a document printed on official letterhead. She began reading. Then her eyebrows lifted in confusion. What is this? Min Jun answered calmly. Ownership documentation. Ella blinked. For what? Min Jun folded his hands together. The restaurant. Ella stared at him. You bought it? Min Jun nodded once. Yes. Ella laughed softly in disbelief. You closed an entire restaurant because of one dinner. Min Jun shook his head slightly. No. He leaned forward. I corrected a system. Ella looked down at the document again. But something else caught her attention. Her name. Printed clearly on the final page. She looked back up. Min Jun, why is my name here? He replied calmly. Because you're the executive director. Ella stared at him in shock. You're serious? Min Jun nodded. Yes. Ella shook her head slightly. I've never run a restaurant. Min Jun remained calm. You understand people. That is more important. Ella looked down at the document again. The responsibility felt heavy. Why me? She asked quietly. Min Jun studied her for a moment before answering. Because you remember what disrespect feels like. Ella said nothing. Then Min Jun continued. A restaurant should welcome people. Not judge them. He leaned back in his chair. And you understand that better than anyone. Ella slowly began to smile. For the first time, the idea didn't feel impossible. It felt meaningful. 3 weeks later, the restaurant reopened. But almost no one recognized it. The design was brighter. The atmosphere was calmer. The staff moved confidently through the dining room. Customers began arriving again. The food was excellent. The service was flawless. But the biggest moment happened quietly that afternoon. Ella stood outside the entrance, looking up at the new sign above the door. It felt strange. Just weeks earlier she had stood at this same entrance and been told she did not belong inside. Now the building belonged to her. The doors opened. A staff member greeted her immediately. Welcome, Director. Ella walked inside slowly. The staff members stood a little straighter when they saw her. Some of them recognized her from the night the restaurant had closed. But this time their expressions were respectful. Ella walked through the dining room. Every detail had been carefully arranged. For the first time since arriving in Seoul, she felt completely comfortable in a place like this. That evening, Min Jun arrived at the restaurant. He entered quietly. No announcement. No attention. He sat at a table near the window. Watching. Ella moved confidently through the dining room. Speaking with the chefs. Greeting customers. Solving small problems. She looked completely different now. Not uncertain. Not uncomfortable. But confident. After the dinner rush ended, Ella finally sat across from Min Jun. She poured 2 glasses of wine. Then she smiled. You rebuilt everything. Min Jun shook his head. No. He looked around the room. You did. Ella glanced across the restaurant. Customers were laughing. Servers moved easily between tables. The room felt alive. Then she asked the question that had stayed in her mind since the beginning. Did you do all this because you were angry? Min Jun considered the question carefully. Then he answered quietly. Anger is temporary. He lifted his glass. Structure is permanent. Ella smiled. Because the restaurant that once pushed her outside into the cold, now welcomed everyone equally. And everyone inside knew exactly why.